like people, horses have off days. And by looking at them before they actually get on the racetrack, you get an initial impression of which way they're leaning.
This is going to sound crazy, but for me, it's intellectual stimulation.
Class is now in session. It's time for night school. Here are your hosts.
Welcome, everybody, one last time in 2018 to the Night School, National Online Fan Education and Player Development Program. It's Season 8 of Night School. It's the finale, 10th of 10 lessons, number 260 all-time. Count them up. Hopefully you've been aboard for many of those. I'm Jeremy Plonk from Horse Player Now, joined by our Knights at the Round Table one last time for this season. First off, we say good evening to Caton Bredar. Hello, Caton.
Hey, it's great to be back. I feel like I've missed you all for the last few sessions.
Well, you know, you're sunning in Florida, taking care of that Gulfstream thing, you know, while the rest of us waddle in the cold. Speaking of guys in earmuffs and scarves, Bob Neumeier checking in from Boston. Neumie, how are you?
You're doing fine, Jeremy. Yes, my lovely wife Michelle and I are hopefully migrating south in a few weeks to get out of the ick here in New England. But I'm hoping that people who listen to this program have learned something. I know that each and every time that I contribute or that I listen or that whatever, I think that the racing is a kind of game that's, number one, extremely difficult. That point we've made 1,000 times. And number two, that the more you know, the more you need to know. And that can be mind-boggling at times. But I think that whatever little points you can take out or take with you that can help in your world is helpful. So hopefully, as a contributor, that I can do my part to advance the cause and make it a little bit understandable for fans who can be intimidated by the whole process, and that's unfortunate. But I think it does exist in the real world. So we do what we can.
And our fourth horseman tonight, literally, figuratively, however you want to look at it, Brian W. Spencer. Welcome in, Spence.
Hey, I know right before we came into this, joking around a little bit about some cold weather. I'm certainly lucky to be in New Orleans, Louisiana right now, but it is winter jacket weather down here. But at least I know I am going to be the recipient of a much nicer break than the rest of you up north later this winter. But glad to be at the tail end of Season 8 of Night School. I think we've had a pretty fun season with this roundtable concept, and we've got a handful of really solid topics to close out the season tonight.
Yeah, heading to Pittsburgh this week. That doesn't quite sound the same as some of these other locales. Good luck to all of you guys staying warm. Our topics tonight in our season finale of Night School, we've got 5 of them on deck. We may dovetail into 6 or 7 as our discussion and our roundtable goes, and we think of more things that play off of each other's statements. But we're going to talk about special days versus regular days on the calendar. We just saw one the past weekend with the Caribbean Classic down at Gulfstream. How do you handicap these kind of days? Caton will give us some insight on that in our entire panel discussion. We'll have a little reaction to what we have seen and heard from Arizona. Our good friends at the Racetrack Industry Program at the University of Arizona just wrapped up their annual symposium last week. A lot of interesting talking points out of the symposium. Neumie's got one he wants to chew on, the integrity of racing panel, and we'll get into that as well here tonight. Also, we're going to talk about the claiming game late in the calendar year. It's the end of the meet at a lot of places. Horses are being dropped in class. When do we want to jump on claimers? When do we want to stay away from them? Some handicapping tips for the claiming races, something you can use year-round and at any circuit. We'll go around the table with everyone's thoughts on betting the claiming races. We'll also look at fresh meets. As we said, it's the end of the season at a lot of places, and the doors are swinging open others. Fairgrounds, of course, up and running for their meet. Gulfstream's championship meet just opened. We've got Santa Anita coming December 26th. Oaklawn coming up in early January. Great meets and great racing opening their doors all around the country. What do you do when a new meet starts? We'll talk about some handicapping approaches to that. And finally, we'll roll in towards the Countdown to the Crown, the 14th year of Countdown to the Crown, my series chronicling each step of the Triple Crown Trail. That debuts the first Friday in January. But before we get to that, we're going to talk tonight about the progression from 2-year-olds to 3-year-olds. And Brian W. Spencer's got some good ideas on that, as well as the rest of the group, on what we're looking for with these 2-year-olds who maybe next year's version of Justify. But panel, last year at this time, we didn't even know who Justify was. So if you've got your Derby horse doped out all by now, I would say you are well ahead of the game. Let's go into the first topic of the night, and that's the special days versus the regular days. Caton, give us a little sense. The Caribbean Classic down at Gulfstream Park, you've been down there for many of the big racing events at Gulfstream. How was the Caribbean Classic different or similar to some of those?
Well, first of all, let me just say, if you haven't experienced it, you should put it on your must-do or must-see calendar, because it was so much fun. Now, from a betting standpoint, others, that could be determined by how it went for you, but the enthusiasm of the crowd, the people representing all the different countries there, and how much they enjoy and have a passion for both racing, the sport, but also some national pride, was unlike any other racing event I have ever been to outside of when I've traveled to some of the countries that were participating. So it's really a lot of fun. But what was interesting to me was hearing a lot of handicappers, and I've been in this boat before too, say going into it, I don't think I'm going to bet these races. I don't know anything about these horses. There's really no data. Now, number one, that is something that I know Gulfstream Park, but in general, the racing world is looking at and trying to focus on how we can get better information from international racing. So I think that's evolving. But I don't know. I look at it sometimes as an opportunity. And I know others may differ. What you don't know or what's strange or different can be intimidating. But to me, that's some of the fun of it is sort of recreating the handicapping process. And I think it holds true in any time you're going to a special event. You can't necessarily treat it the way you would a day in, day out event, a racing event at Gulfstream. But that said, I think you treat it like you do any race, period, or any time you go someplace. What you're trying to do is come up with the fastest horse, right? So you look at the information that you have. In this case, we had workout information. You still had morning line odds. You had records of the participants. And in some instances, you had some past history to go to. And what I found was that racing on Caribbean Classic Day, and oftentimes in the state-restricted days or Claiming Crown, it can be some of the more formful racing that we see as opposed to the day in and day out situations. So, the horses that people were talking most about, particularly Halhala, who had run the past year at Gulfstream, and Kukulkan, who was the Mexico Triple Crown winner, they came through, and in a big way. The horse that had come from Venezuela and had been working extremely well at Gulfstream and had real positive Clocker report comments, that horse won. So, there weren't as many surprises as people would think. I think you just try to apply the same tactics that you do on any day, but you treat it as a separate entity altogether, that it is a hybrid, that you can't necessarily count on the same patterns that you see developing on other race days apply.
Handle on the Caribbean Classic program was right around $9 million on a Saturday, and that was a big number. It was big over last year. Not as big as the Claiming Crown, down about 25-30% from what they handled the week before on the Claiming Crown, because of that familiarity. But there aren't too many racetracks in America that wouldn't take a $9 million handle day on a Saturday afternoon, Bob. So these days may not be in your wheelhouse per se, but they absolutely have some interest. Your thoughts on some of these specialty kind of days, whether it be the Caribbean Classic or the Claiming Crown or some of these state-bred championships?
Well, I think that if you're a bettor, that information is paramount, and there's so much of it within the contiguous United States that it's almost too much.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, as my friend loves to tell me, paralysis by analysis, which I'm very guilty of with my analytical mind. But, when I see a series of races that from the Caribbean Classic, if you will, or races where we are asked to talk about or bet on England or Australia or Hong Kong or whatever, they're very viable races, very bettable races. But for me, because I'm not familiar with them, and because I'm not very familiar with them, I really choose not to bet them because in this case, familiarity breeds contempt from a betting point of view.
Right.
I think that it's great that they're on. I think that the Caribbean Classic, might have been a lost leader for the Stronach Group in Gulfstream. I don't know. But there are a lot of South Americans and Puerto Ricans and Dominican Republicans and all that really enjoy racing. And so I'm sure that day dedicated to them was very important to them. And I'm sure that the Stronach Group and other people are hopeful that carries over into their zest for betting in the United States throughout the meet. So that being said, I just think that as a bettor that I tend to stay away from them only because I'm not familiar with them.
I remember going to Laurel Park as a kid when they ran the old version of the Washington, D.C. International, and there'd be horses from Russia. And this is like at the height of the Cold War in the Reagan years, and there's Russian horses running against, Angel Cordero and horses coming in from New York. And the intrigue that goes with a day like that was special. You didn't know what you were looking at necessarily in the past performances, but the feel, like Caton was saying, and the festive atmosphere to it can be an important marketing tool, as Neumeier spun right there, that, it may not make for the greatest one day, but it can lead to a new fan base and developing a bigger fan base and broadening some of your horizons. But even still, like I said, almost $9 million in handle on the Caribbean Classic tells you something. I did it for the Express Bet Race of the Week, and I handicapped the Classic, and I kind of found it interesting to dig into some of those off-the-path handicapping strategies because, like Caton was saying and Bob was saying, there were things in the past performances that just aren't there, and so that can be a bad thing if you're always looking for them, but the fact that everybody else doesn't have them either means if you put the work into it, you go into YouTube and watch a bunch of race replays and, call up some pedigree notes and look at last year's charts of the races to see which trainers and connections did well, which pedigrees did well over this racetrack. I found that an interesting way to handicap and approach, and it was kind of fun and refreshing, to be honest. So, would I want a day like that every day? Probably not. I wouldn't line up and bet Hong Kong with past performances, not showing each running line and everything that I normally am used to. But on a one-off basis for a special event, I kind of found it a little bit refreshing and unique to take a look at. Spence, you've worked at tracks that had, Illinois Champions Day in Arlington and, down at Fairgrounds, Louisiana Champions Day, which we just saw renewed recently. Your thoughts on some of these specialty days?
I think that there, at least for me, from being up at Arlington when they had those Illinois bred the Prairie State Festival days and now Louisiana Champions Day, I've kind of noticed a little bit of a shift, and I think there's some sense of that we've seen in New York and elsewhere too. But focusing on Louisiana, if you look at the races that were just run this last weekend on Louisiana Champions Day, years ago, when we were talking about Louisiana breds, we were talking about a sort of specific subset of horses, small name sires standing in the state, really kind of a small group of horses. But now you've got these horses. Look at Louisiana Champions Day past performances. You got Louisiana breds by Into Mischief, Cross Traffic, looking at Lucky, Arch, Midnight Loot. I mean, these are not your typical Louisiana breds from 7, 8, 9 years ago. So I think one of the things that I found, and from a betting perspective, this is a little bit disappointing to me, is I think that some of these state-bred divisions, especially in a state like Louisiana, they've become a little bit top-heavy because you've seen, you're just more likely to get a good horse when you're breeding to one of these, national sires like Into Mischief than when you're, breeding 6 or 7, kind of bayou mares to custom for Carlos. And I think that we've kind of seen that. We've seen some of these shifts in that Louisiana-bred program. And for me, from a handicapping perspective, I'm far less likely to be trying to swing for prices these days on those state-bred days than I would have, say, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago.
I agree with that. My observation is a lot of the state-bred days and specialty days, just like you said and like Caton said off the top, they tend to be some of the most formful racing that we've seen, even though we tend to think, these are going to be specialty events and difficult to decipher, but a lot of times they're quite formful. Caton, let you put a final cap on it. In terms of something like the Claiming Crown, we're going to talk a lot more about claiming racing a little bit later, but, your impressions of the Claiming Crown and where that sits on the calendar for the nation.
It's becoming a bigger deal and more of a target for a lot of trainers but also a kind of a transition where some of the names, even the Mike Maker barn, who previously pointed for it, now you see more trainers kind of singling it out, pointing for it with horses that turn out to be, those diamonds in the rough or those great claims. And so as a result, I think the races have become a little more challenging to handicap, but there's better opportunity as far as prices are concerned because you have more of those horses coming from different places. That's another one where I don't know that you can look at any trends. In this case, at Gulfstream and the championship meet, it comes at the first day of the meet. But if it were at any other point in the calendar, I still think it stands alone and separate from whatever may or may not be happening the rest of the meet. You'll see different names win. You'll see, it's all a matter of those horses that have been pointed for it and who are able to, come up with those huge efforts. And I thought also one thing that struck me, there's a lot more parity now in terms of a good horse, a claiming crown winner, being able to come from just about any circuit now, as opposed to years past where I think, particular circuits really dominated the ones that you would naturally think of. You're going to find horses that are winning from even some very what's considered lesser circuits, or the B track, so to speak, because it's just the best of the best, as is the case with state bred races or with Caribbean Classic or any time you have events that people are targeting.
Let's shift our gears now on Night School as we move to our second topic in this December 2018 edition. And it's a little bit of a follow-up, if you will, and the fallout from what we saw and heard at the Racetrack Industry Program, University of Arizona, our RTIP Symposium, the annual gathering, kind of like the winter meetings, if you will, in baseball, the Hot Stove League. A lot of folks get together from the industry. I've had the pleasure of being out there a few times myself. The panels get together. We talk about the problems in racing, and we try to come up with solutions for them. A lot of times the talk ends at the end of the symposium and we don't get a lot of actionable progress moving forward in the game, and I think that tends to happen in most large organizations and industries that way, but racing not unique in that respect. But Bob Neumeier, one place where racing is unique is the importance of integrity. I mean, integrity is important in any business, but in a gambling business, isn't it everything?
Well, it's not everything, unfortunately, Jeremy, only because we love it so much that whether it's bad food or too much money to get in or to park, we do it anyway because we love it. We love betting, and we'll do things in spite of. And I think in one sense, racetrack managements over the year have taken advantage of us because their problems exist, but they do very little about it. And I firmly believe that integrity is the number one issue in racing today, yet we bet anyway. It's up to us to kind of look at it and say, what trainers are we suspicious of and what are we going to do about it? Are we going to follow them like lemmings and just bet their horses because they are who they are? Or are we going to, like I do, turn the page until I look at a race where I think the playing field is more level, shall we say, wink, wink. I don't know for sure. I'm not accusing anybody. But I do know this, that the symposium in Tucson last week, a gentleman talked about integrity in sports betting, which is now legal, and integrity in racing. And because of the fact that there are 38, count them, 38 racing jurisdictions that have different rules, different medication issues, different prosecutions, different whatever, that there is a problem. Now, I know that anytime money is involved, that there's going to be issues. I get that. But how rampant, this is what I would say, how rampant is drug use? How rampant is this today? And I think that most people who bet have a jaundiced eye, and they believe that racing, like NBA playoffs, is a big problem in terms of integrity, in terms of whatever. And so whether it truly exists, it's perceived to exist. And if it's perceived to exist, then it's a big problem. I don't know what racing has to do with it. I'm told that the U.S. Integrity Act bill that was talked about last year is dead. I don't know that for sure. There's a LASIK little addendum attached to it, which may be part of this whole deal. It's a complicated process. I realize that. But listen, this is a huge, giant issue, and I frankly don't know what people are going to do about it now that this bill is apparently dead.
Caton, I'm going to turn to you next on this. I know you have a lot of interest within the racing industry and work for a lot of companies, but you also have a lot of experience, front side, back side, and know a lot of people. Give us your sense of where you think the integrity of racing is perceived, and where does that match up with your observations?
Well, there's no doubt that, and I know Neumeier would concur with this, that, I mean, perception is reality. So even if I don't think that some of the things that racing is accused of are indeed facts, but if the perception is that they're occurring, then it's something that absolutely has to be addressed. And I certainly think that there is the perception that there is a lot going on behind the scenes, that there's collusion at every turn, that there's self-interest involved in things like officiating, that there's pressure from racetracks, that Handle is driving the decisions that are made in terms of the outcomes of races. And I don't know what the answer is to that, but I do think it's something that absolutely has to be addressed. The one thing is, I will say, I don't think, I actually know that there isn't like a pipeline from a racetrack operator or a president of a racetrack to the steward stand now. I think there were days that happened, but at major racetracks anyway. I can't speak for every racetrack in the country, but the major racetracks that I'm a part of, that simply isn't happening. But the very fact that a lot of people think it is, that, if the outcome of a carryover is going to be determined by a disqualification, and that fans think that that's why stewards are adjudicating a certain incident rather than what they really believe is happening and trying to interpret and apply the rules of racing, then we have a serious problem, and it absolutely needs to be addressed. I don't know what the answer is as far as addressing it, but I do think that there seems to be a large percentage of the people out there who are in the sport that if it goes on long enough, we sell our own message to the outside world. If everybody's talking about the one thing we want to do is build the sport, grow the sport, get more people involved, have more people wagering, build the wagering pool, then the worst thing we can do is ignore what people on the inside are saying or how they're interpreting the events that are happening. And I do think there is a serious problem with that.
Well, that's a good point, and why we want to bring it up even in a fan education and player development program like Night School here at the end of the season, and something to chew on for fans and potential players and existing players who may be having some second thoughts about the game that they play. Brian, your thought on this? I mean, you're no spring chicken to the game. You've been around a while, not as long as Neumeier and Caton, but do you have any kind of different perspective because you came at this a little bit later?
I wish I did. I think that one of the sort of upsetting things to me is getting into the game maybe a little bit later than some of the other people on the round table here. I kind of always assumed that we would get to the point where we would get past, as Neumeier mentioned, these 30-some racing states with their different patchwork rules. I kind of always assumed that we were going to get to at least some level of, I guess, a national governing body. But as time goes on, not to put a dark, pessimistic bow on it, I don't ever see that happening anymore at this point. You've got all of these different states. All of these things would have to be changed within written statutes as far as, the racing commissions are written and the bylaws as far as how tracks conduct their live racing meets. I think there's far too many moving parts, and that is not a good answer. It's not an optimistic answer, but I find, what are you going to do? Are you going to have the big tracks letting the little tracks tell them how to do their job? The little tracks don't want the big tracks telling them how to do their job either. So I think that's kind of how we end up getting to that stalemate where I think we can kind of envision a future where maybe we could have a national regulatory body that would be able to, keep some of these rules and regulations consistent from state to state, which would no doubt boost the at least perception of integrity within the game. But my optimism for that happening is fleeting, and more so each day, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think that's a natural inclination when we all come into something new, or we're in the building stage of it in our own careers or our own mental resumes, that you see the end game a lot easier. But then the longer you're around, you see how hard that end game is to reach. And then you realize why, well, the people have been struggling with this problem for 20 years. Now I see why they have been. And it can just keep moving that goalpost further and further down the road. And to that point, we talk about the regulating bodies. If there was one regulating body for horse racing, would that regulating body have the trust and the admiration of its customer base as being run with great integrity? Do you run the risk that if everything is under one governing body and that one governing body is corrupt as hell, then everybody throws up their hands and says no more? I mean, maybe you don't like state A or state B, the way the stewards have adjudicated, or some of the laws or the carryovers and the way that the takeout has been handled in some states. You kind of have the buyer's option of moving somewhere else, right? I mean, if you got really upset with track A for raising takeout a couple years ago, you could have went to B, C, and D that had a lower takeout. At least you had some options. I don't know that everything coming together with one general consensus solves some of the rules that we have. And I've had this personal thought with myself in terms of the integrity issues of horse racing, from everything from, aftercare to the way the horses are treated to some of these PETA protests over the years, and all these things, they weigh on you, and you start to make these mental and moral decisions in your mind. And then you start to look at everywhere else. You said, okay, well, if I didn't work in racing, or if I didn't invest my free time and my recreational money in the racing, where would I put it? Well, maybe I would enjoy football more. Okay, well, we're seeing everything in football is like as negative as can be, right? From kneeling for the anthem to head injuries to everything that goes with that. With Belichick's a cheater, and the NFL's in the tank for the Patriots, and everything that we hear there. So I don't know that. The perception is the reality, no question about it. But I don't know if the perception changes. If you work in the automotive industry, everybody thinks that, that's corrupting in the tank. And these plants are making billions of dollars and closing factories and taking their jobs elsewhere. I mean, is there a segment anywhere where anybody's really happy with it now? That's kind of one of the questions.
Jeremy, let me ask you this, and the panel can weigh in, please, with this as well, is what do we do about it as bettors? What do we do about it? Whether, if nothing changes, and apparently nothing is going to change in our lifetime.
Right.
There was a chance that this bill could have been passed, and that, you saw the United States Anti-Doping Agency could have taken over the sport, but it's not going to happen, apparently. What do we do? That would be my question. What do we do about it?
I've got an answer, and I think Jeremy kind of already alluded to it, and this is I can only speak for myself, but I can tell you over the last couple of years, my handle hasn't necessarily decreased, but it has become very specifically directed at certain tracks. The percentage of my yearly handle directed at probably 2 tracks nationwide. I'm not going to, name names here as far as who I'm definitely not betting, but, I'm basically speaking with my dollars. And whereas I used to play around the country a lot more, I've soured on certain racing states. So for me personally, is that a systemic solution? Absolutely not. But from a personal solution, I'm just not spending my dollars anywhere that I don't feel comfortable spending them anymore.
Well, and if enough people, or a large percentage of people, handled that same approach that Brian just mentioned, then the market forces would determine who's right and who's wrong. I mean, that's if you precipitously see your handle drop and other places are going up, you've done something wrong. And to me, the only way, like Bob says, what do we do about it? The only way the markets really move is if there's a major change in the handle. I mean, if there's a major shift somewhere, and I'm certainly not a boycotter, and we've had those people in the racing industry and people like that try to rally everybody to penalize one track and move to another, or one company and move to another. That's not what I'm advocating. And like Brian said, it's where do you personally feel comfortable with it? And we don't tell you where to feel comfortable with it. That's your choice to make. And so if everybody kind of has the same feeling and we all feel comfortable with track Z, then Track Z is going to get the benefit of all of our business, and the other tracks would have to, you would think, would notice that, and that there would be some sort of move towards it. Well, one example of that, I think, a good example of that, I kind of think is Tampa Bay Downs. Tampa Bay Downs was low-level racing. I mean, these were horses from the Mid-Atlantic who went south and couldn't run anywhere else for a while. Yeah, but Tampa emphasized turf racing and big fields, and all of a sudden their product really rose in stature. They got a big advocate behind him in Andy Beyer. Andy Beyer, really selling the Tampa Winter Signal as something that he loved to play and that he advocated for, really helped them. But now look at the Gulfstream product now versus what it was 10 years ago. It's a lot closer to the Tampa races in terms of like number of turf races, emphasizing big fields. So I think some of that money moving towards a track like Tampa caught the eyes of people, and people like Tim Ritvo, who is essentially in charge of a lot of the racing decisions and operations at Gulfstream over the last several years. So, if we kind of speak and go a particular direction with our money and with our interests, maybe some of it funnels in the right direction. But picking winners and losers and who boycotts whom and things like that, I don't ever advocate that, and I was staunchly against organizations and groups who did things like that. I see their general purpose in it, but I don't think that groups of people should come together in a mob mentality like we see, sometimes on the internet. I'd like to see it happen more organically, Everybody make your own decisions, see where you end up.
Okay, Jeremy, if Brian is correct, and I think he is at some point, that people are looking at certain racetracks and betting some and not betting others based on perception of integrity. Well, multiply that times 10,000 or 50,000 or 100,000. That's just one aspect. And I think that by and large, that we hear these, quote, administrators, whoever they are, say we're trying to grow the game. We want to grow the growth of horse racing. How are you going to grow it when these integrity issues crop up time and time again? You're going to stunt the growth of horse racing by not persecuting, people who, other than that famous incident in Pennsylvania a couple of years last year, as a matter of fact, the trial of Murray Rojas, you should read about, and that'll open your eyes, and how 4 veterinarians pleaded guilty to administering drugs on the day of racing, and I don't want to go into all of the details, but it's mind-boggling. Well, the people think this happens every day. In fact, the leading trainer at Penn National, I want to say her name is Beatty.
Stephanie Beatty.
Happens every day.
Years ago. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
She said it. This is when this whole issue was brought up last year. She said this shit goes on. Excuse me. This stuff goes on every day in racing. And I think people believe that's the case even now. I think they believe it in California. They believe it in Florida. They believe it in New York. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. I kind of doubt it, but I think that there are cases where we look at with a jaundiced eye. And when we look at something with a jaundiced eye, it means this, that the sport will not grow in any way, shape, or form unless this integrity issue gets cleaned up, and I have very doubts that it will, to be honest with you. And I think the Horse Racing Integrity Act had a chance to, but apparently it's dead in the water.
And adjudicating these things is part of it, too. Look, the examples that we can give in the industry are essentially like, the attack on Pennsylvania racing, which we have seen and has been, played out in the media, and we've seen what has gone on there. But it's kind of an easy punching bag to take a shot at a Penn National or Parks or something like that because it's not the big mainstream. It's not the New York Yankees. This isn't NYRA. It's not Kentucky. It's not Gulfstream. It's not Santa Anita. What happens if the same sort of thing goes on at Santa Anita or at Churchill Downs? Then it's like a CNN expose cover story, and it's national network news, it's PETA, it's everybody involved. At a low-level track, it's easy to throw the book at people, wag the finger and say we're being tough on some of these integrity issues, but when the same thing happens, what happens if it happens to somebody wins the Kentucky Derby, Kentucky Derby winning trainer, then we have something like this happen. I'm of the opinion that it's got a lot better chance of being swept under the rug for a big-time trainer than it does at one of these low-level tracks, because I think there are forces in the industry that fear the calamity of a major scandal at the highest level. So, but would that be what is best? I mean, like if you bet on an industry that was tough enough and willing enough to throw the book at the top dogs, then I would feel like it was a much more legitimate organization. I mean, I want the NFL to find Tom Brady just as easy as they would find the worst player in the league, but we know it just doesn't seem to work that way. And Caton, you work around a lot of these, big jurisdictions. I would have to think that, that when something comes up that involves these folks, I mean, Richard Dutrow was he is the biggest example of someone who had the book thrown at him, and he had the phone book and the encyclopedia and the baseball almanac thrown at him all at once with the 10-year ban, I mean, compared to what we see with other suspensions. But he wasn't a very likable guy, and I think that became easy for the industry not to support Rick Dutrow. I mean, he had his friends in the industry, but he was a black hatter. What happens if a good guy does something and they throw the book at him like Rick Dutrow? I think it's a whole different reaction to it.
Well, Dutrow's kind of an interesting situation because he's, I know the picture that was portrayed for anyone outside the game who wasn't familiar with it was one that was easy to label the villain or to feel that was, a positive thing that the book was thrown at him. But those in the industry a lot of people felt very differently, as we saw with the petition that was circulated last year to try to reinstate him. So, you kind of have this dichotomy, and I think that's really one of the bigger problems that this industry is facing to go along with the integrity issue is that there are so many different forces at work that there is no united picture that's portrayed to the outside world. I mean, there's the conversation we have inside the industry and the conversation that happens to the world at large. And there is no filter in racing. There is no difference with it. And it just plays out with this kind of dysfunction on a regular basis. But I feel like the only thing that could help to stem the bleeding would be to get, if there was ever a scenario, and I don't see this happening anytime soon, but if Handel were to dictate, or suddenly you saw this happening, it might. If even the larger tracks cooperated in terms of establishing some, right now, if a racetrack bars a trainer or kicks them out or doesn't allow access to the grounds of a veterinarian or anybody else, which is often their right to do, if it's a big enough trainer, most other track, there is going to be another track, even a high-profile track that's more than happy to open their doors to them. And this is in part because of the competition for horses that are racing and the desire to have big fields that produce and generate bigger handle. And as long as each of the tracks, including the powerhouse tracks, whether it's the Stronach Group, whether it's Nairo, whether it's Keeneland Churchill, whether it's like the tracks like Kentucky Downs that are sort of an island unto themselves, or the Ellis Parks of the world, and then California, the outlier, the Los Alamedoses. If there can't be cooperation and some synergy in terms of who's acceptable and who's not, who's welcome, who's not, how we're going to enforce whatever the rules are, even if the rules differ from state to state, even the way they're enforced differs dramatically. I mean, that would be the starting point to me. If I had a track, I'd figure out how to cooperate with them rather than compete against them on a regular and ongoing basis to try to improve the perception that in turn would improve the reality. So, I mean, that I really think that's the biggest first step that could happen, but I don't know that it's going to happen.
Yeah, not a lot of optimism, but key words here: cooperation, integrity. The customer speaking with their wallet. I mean, we don't come to a general conclusion that solves any problems, and much like the Symposium of Racing at Arizona, we talk and then we see if our actions kind of ever come to fruition. We'll take a timeout on Night School. When we return, more handicapping topics as we get into betting the races in our next segment. Stay with us.
And we'll be right back with more Night School.
I've never experienced anything like it. I thought to myself, this could be today. Why not today? And it was. The horse went from last to first and won by a nose. Winning the NAC changed my life. It never would have happened without TwinSpires.com. I won a TwinSpires qualifying tournament and went on to take the $1 million prize. Play at TwinSpires.com and you could be the next one to hit it big.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back the Thoroughbreds.
1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock. 5, 6, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, rock. 9, 10, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, rock. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight.
The Thoroughbreds are back at Remington Park August 25th and 26th with cash prizes, Remington Park, and our casino that rocks right around the clock.
We're gonna rock till broad daylight. Gonna rock around the clock.
Only at Remington Park.
Do you want unlimited access to handicapping without exorbitant prices? Then Brisnet.com has you covered with a variety of plans for past performances, pedigree, and raw data. The Brisnet.com Performance Plan offers unlimited PDF past performances for just $75 per month and is available at Brisnet.com/PP. American Produce Records Online puts the pedigrees of nearly 1 million dams and more than 2 million foals at your fingertips, plus sire stats for only $275 per year, and is available at Brisnet.com/APR. The Brisnet.com data plan offers unlimited access to race day data files, perfect for handicappers with their own database or to plug into other people's programs. The data plan is just $125 per month. Visit Brisnet.com for all this information and more, and discover why Brisnet.com is the handicapper's edge.
Welcome back to our Nights at the Round Table.
Welcome back to Night School, the 2018 season finale. Jeremy Plonk, joined by Bob Neumeier, Caton Bredar, Brian W. Spencer. The Knights at the round table one last time for the season. Now let's talk handicapping in this second segment of Night School tonight. We want to get into some pertinent handicapping topics that are relevant over the winter and where we are on the current calendar, but stuff you can use year-round. First topic up is the claiming game. Claiming races are, of course, where horses can be purchased out of the race. They're the lower-level racing classification, if you will. And when you talk about the claiming races, people call them the backbone of the industry. There's more claiming races than most any other race type that we see. A lot of maidens out there. But the claiming races are the ones that the majority of horses end up falling back to. And as handicappers, we have to figure out how we want to bet these claiming races. Let's start out with Brian W. Spencer here. Brian, give fans some tips in betting claiming races, because this time of year, with the winter changeover, you see a lot of barns getting rid of horses at the end of the year, picking up horses to move to other circuits. It's a busy time for claiming races. What are some of your betting thoughts?
Yeah, and one of the things that I think, it would have been nice probably for me to get this out there, though, for people who are listening to the Woodbine Now preview podcast that we do every week, something Brian Nadeau brings up a lot towards the end of the season is one of the things that's become very helpful is you've really got to get into trainer intent on these drops, because, we're talking about a place like Woodbine where a lot of these trainers don't go anywhere afterwards. Sure, Norm McKnight goes down to Oaklawn, he'll show up at Churchill Downs, but a lot of these barns, they kind of pack it up for the winter. So you get some of these big name barns putting these horses in for what appear to be very panicky drops. But, as the meet nears an end, it's not so panicky. They're just daring anybody else to claim a horse and then sit on them for 5 months until thoroughbred racing returns, later in the spring at Woodbine again. So one of the things that has become very important to me a horse just to pay bills on them for 4 months before you can turn around and run them again. So a panicky drop at one track at one time of the meet does not equal a panicky drop at another track at another time of the meet. And I think that learning to find the distinction between those two types of drops and where barns are placing horses, how much they are or are not afraid to lose a horse at any point in a meet, I think is a huge edge, because that can really lead you to, is this a class dropping 7-5 favorite I'm tossing, or is it one that I'm keying on top?
And Caton, what about you when it comes to handicapping the claiming races?
You know, the one thing I agree completely with Brian about the trainer intent, and to take it a step farther, the thing that I always am looking at when I'm not sure what to make of horses that are dropping in class is the purse involved, because and that's something that's a lot of times overlooked. But you know, sometimes depending on the circuit, a trainer has that investment, or no, I should say owner in this case, but trainers have the investment of what they claim, so you know what they've got in, which is a real advantage from a handicapping perspective, to know what they've already invested in the horse when they come back, particularly with a short period of time since they were claimed. Look to see what the value of the purse is, not just what the level of claiming is, because a lot of times if they've changed circuits, for example, the purse may justify a drop in class where they're willing to risk the horse because they're going to win so much, more than enough to cover what they've got into the horse and then some. So that doesn't, just because they're dropping in class doesn't mean that they're going to be losing or that the horse will lose. But then again, if you see a horse that's dropping in class off of a claim or in close proximity to the claiming time, and the purse is very small and they're going to lose money, well then, I mean, to me, that can often be more of an indication of a desire by the connections to get rid of the horse versus keep them around, that maybe the claim isn't what they anticipated or what they bargained for. So I really think that's an important element if there's, you know, a close turnaround time for horses that are dropping in class. The other thing I'd say is looking at patterns, because there are the trainers that play the claiming game aggressively, and even the trainers that don't have many claiming horses, like a Todd Pletcher, they have pretty consistent patterns and styles, and you can just follow them. Look at history, past history. A lot of people don't think that Pletcher wins very many claiming races because they don't associate him as a claiming trainer. But the truth is, that's one of his higher percentages. True, they may not be great horses, but the fact is they're in a spot where they can win, and then they don't have to worry about them going forward. So there's a pretty high strike rate with that, and there's actually some value to be had. Because I've seen more Pletcher claiming horses or horses that have dropped in for a tag that have gone off at better odds than maybe other categories.
Yeah, you get that perception that the trainer doesn't do something well, and that can help you in the value department for sure. Bob, your thoughts on betting those claiming races?
Yeah, I think Caton brings up a good point about the math of it all, and I think that it's important to understand that, you know, when a horse runs within a reasonable period of time, 30 days, 45 days, is claimed, let's say, for 20, and runs back for 16 or 20, it's, you know, 60% of the purse. How much is it going to cost a trainer to house that horse? And if the math makes sense, then I would look at it as in a positive light. The other angle here is interesting to me, and that is taking a look at a number of races that a horse has run, and was he claimed or wasn't he? Not so much for high-price claimers, because I think they're inflated anyway. $50,000 for 2-year-olds, $50,000 for 3-year-olds, ridiculous. But when you go back in time and look at a form and you see that a horse was not claimed 6 months ago when running for 10, that's a negative to me. Mm-hmm. I think there's some pretty sharp owners and trainers that if a horse was sound and owners were looking to make a buck, they would have jumped in and claimed it. On the other hand, extremely important handicapping aspect. If a horse is claimed a number of times, 3 in a row, 3 out of 4, 4 out of 5, this to me is extremely extremely positive and shows me that they're in good shape and that they're ready to go again, because horses, they wouldn't be reaching in that many times. So there's two angles there, horses that aren't claimed and horses that are claimed a lot.
Yeah, and sometimes you see that list of who's who in the claiming game of, this horse has been claimed 4 times, and it's like 4 of the top 10 trainers at the track over and over, exchanging hands with high percentage outfits. That's a really good sign. One of the things I like to see when I'm handicapping a claiming race is a horse off the claim trying something different, because chances are the reason that a trainer goes in and claims a horse is because they already have something in mind for that horse. The condition book is written, 30 days, 45 days, sometimes in advance. They know that there's a particular race coming up later. This horse has been going short, and they really think he should be running long based on the way they've seen him in the past. They claim him, they stretch him out. That's a good sign. Maybe they try him on the turf. Maybe they try blinkers. Maybe there's something in the workout pattern that the horse has a really good workout since the claim, and they may have changed something up there in the program of how they're training the horse, or a piece of equipment. So a horse in the claiming ranks who's making a change after being claimed, I think is a good angle to look at too. So we've given you some things to chew on in handicapping claiming races. Hopefully you can put some of those to use the next time you open up the program and see a claiming race in the program. You're probably going to see 3 or 4 of them every race day, no matter which track you're looking at. Let's move to our next handicapping topic on Night School tonight, and that's fresh race meets. We've seen that the season kicked off in November at Fairgrounds. We've got a December opening in early December back at the Gulfstream proper after Gulfstream West ran their short meet. We're going to have Santa Anita opening in December, Oaklawn in January, Turf Paradise. You've got all kinds of tracks in the winter that kick off towards the spring. Sunland Park will go to a more thoroughbred feel. A lot of different race meets kicking off here. So what do we look for when a new meet starts? We'll kick off with Caton here as our first panelist to chime in on this. But Caton, when you get a new race meet, what are some of the things you're looking at attacking or maybe avoiding?
Well, based on my results at Gulfstream over the first 2 weeks of the week of the championship meet, I wish I knew. I mean, have to go back to night school to figure it out. But it does. In looking at what's happening, and it kind of takes me back to what you should often be doing on a regular basis. But that is assessing. Do your handicapping for a new race meet. See what happens, whether you're right, whether you're wrong, whether you missed something. Really kind of go back and analyze what has happened at that early juncture before you start, jumping in the rest of the meet. Because sometimes you just might be misinterpreting something or drawing the wrong conclusion. For example, this meet, one thing that struck me right off the bat is that, and I was not having a handle on how things are, but the tracks seem to be playing differently. So in doing some talking to other people, we find out that, yes, indeed, there is a new track superintendent, and he's maybe maintaining the track a little differently. It's definitely playing slower, or was, until we had maybe a change in the weather. And the races are running a little bit differently than has been the case before. So I think even with a meet that you're very familiar with, at the start of a meet, you kind of have to keep an open mind. Try to find out if there are variables that have changed from years past that might signal that the track itself is going to be a little different, that maybe stables have done something different with their program. Todd Pletcher and a number of other trainers had horses in South Florida on a year-round basis, more so than has been the case in the past. That sometimes changes their entire program and how geared up they are when they get to South Florida, or when we start to see the championship meet, the start of the new meet, than has been the case in years past. Kind of familiarize yourself with new stables. There are a number of names at some of the meets that have just kicked off that I'm not as familiar with. All those factors can kind of change. They're variables that you don't necessarily know how to interpret right off the bat. And then if all else fails, you go back to basics. Well, if you're not handicapping it well for the first few days, kind of try to see if there's a pattern. And in my case, it was kind of falling back on some past assumptions and thinking that it would be similar to years past. try to get to know a little bit more about those stables that are the new stables. Ask some questions or kind of reassess your handicapping and your tools. Scale down, go back to basics. Just pace, race complexion, and how the race is going to fall together, and who seems to be the fastest horse, who's most conducive to the way the track has been playing or not playing. And it usually gets a little bit better. If you don't succeed at first, you try again, but you may have to scale back a little bit until you get a better handle on how things are playing.
Yeah, no shame in the budget. No shame in cutting your budget back and waiting until you get a better feel for things. That often can be the best recipe. But continue to handicap, because the idea is to try to figure things out. And maybe you do that while your budget's on pause, but keep handicapping through that process. Bob, your thoughts on new race meets?
I jump in with both feet.
Somehow I knew that.
I hope you did than I did.
I jump in the first day of the meet, as a matter of fact. So I don't worry or give two damns about how the track is playing. I think it means nothing to me. And if it does mean something to somebody, well, it could change in the blink of an eye. Don't forget that. So I think every race has its own little nuances, its own little merits, good and bad. And this one thing will always stick with me is new racing or old racing or new meets or meets that have gone on for 3 months, whatever, and that is the basic principle of return on investment. Okay, that's what it's all about. And I believe that this is a staple to handicapping and keeping your head above water, God forbid doing well and making money. Just the whole idea that every race has its own merits. And the return on investment and the odds board, what it reads and how you line up the horses will dictate whether you jump in or whether you wait for another time. Patience is important, obviously. There's so many races now, so many horizontal plays, so many stuff that can just dazzle you and overwhelm you and intimidate you at times. So it's really important to be patient, I think. And it's also important to return the magic 3 words to me, and that is return on investment.
Any magic words from you, Mr. Spencer?
Just one. Wait. Absolutely no interest for me early on in a meet with there's just too many variables, and I'm trying to boil down these handicapping processes and building wagers to as few variables as possible. As you've got to meet Safe Fairgrounds. It's the one I'm the most familiar with over the course of the last decade. You've got horses who have been laid up since the end of the last meet. You've got horses coming in from 6, 7, 8 different tracks around the country. There's just too much going on. My strength of opinion early in a meet is just never going to be as strong as it is later in a meet. My handle the first 6 weeks of any meet. Now, granted, if we're talking a track like Keeneland, you don't have that luxury. But here in New Orleans, I have the luxury of waiting 5-6 weeks before really diving in, because the meet does go for nearly 5 months. So, my handle increases quite a bit once we get into that second set of, the second condition book, let's say, rather than the first one. But I'm definitely the total opposite of Neumeier. I am as much of a wait and see early in a meet as I could possibly be. There are enough wagering opportunities to go around that I don't need to be guessing.
Tom Petty, you ever hear him, Brian?
I'm not that young, Neumeier. Come on.
It's a good tune. This would be good for you. You could play it in the background. Waiting is the hardest part. The waiting is the hardest part.
Hey, if nothing else, I brought the serenade out from Neumeier, so that was worth it all.
Yeah, we got Neumeier to sing to us.
You know who Tom Petty is, Brian, by the way?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I'm not that young. I'm not 20 years old. I've been around.
Okay. Just want to check.
Oh,
I know you're a man of broad scope, but I didn't realize that Rock and Roll 101 was part of your lexicon, but I'm impressed.
I have no idea how I'm going to follow that, but I'm going to try to and throw in a comment or two about playing these new meets that we're discussing here. You know, like Oaklawn, as Caton mentioned, if the meet is doing something different, the track is doing something different, it's a different situation. You want to keep an eye on that. Oaklawn always starts in mid-January. They typically end the first week of April. This year they're running through the Kentucky Derby in May. And so if you're a normal handicapper of Oaklawn, you know, the barns that maybe come flying out of the box in January may not be the same ones this year. They might be saving a little bit more. Horses that may be offered for a claiming tag in past meets, they might be holding on to them a little bit longer because that meet's going to extend an extra month this year. So you want to kind of, you know, watch and see what happens there. I like the approach of the tortoise and the hare from Jim Mazur, one of the original stats guys and stats geeks in horse racing, has put out a lot of good products and seminars and discussions over the years. A good guy to follow, Jim Mazur, M-A-Z-U-R, if you're into Googling some of his material. But, you know, he would label trainers tortoises or hares based on how they start a meet. And I think that's important. If you go back and look at how particular trainers come out of the box at certain meets, some start very fast, some start slow, and you'll see a pattern of that develop over the course of various years. So that's something I think to keep an eye on. And you say, well, how do I do that without buying an expensive product and everything? Just go to Equibasin, where they have all the historical charts. You have the charts for the current meet. Hit the historical charts button, go back a year, and look at the first dates that are offered at a particular track. And just look at the first weekend of racing. You'll find out very quickly. You know, look through 3 or 4 days of charts, and you're going to see repeated names. Okay, 3 years in a row, this barn won 2 races opening weekend. I mean, these kind of names will pop up, and then others you'll see, well, wow, I looked at this, you know, I look at 3 days worth of charts, and this barn got nothing, and I know they're going to be one of the top trainers by the end of the meet. Maybe they start out a little slower with their stock, so that's something you can look at. The old tortoise and hare from Jim Mazur, I think, is something to consider. Horse for course is important, I think, at a lot of racetracks. Those are horses that run well over a particular track, but I think they become even more kind of, you know, embraceable at the beginning of a meet because you're looking at a horse's form who may be soured a little bit from running at tracks that aren't their favorite place. Now they get back over their favorite home track, and maybe they've had 4 or 5 bad races in a row, and all of a sudden you're going back to a good performance from last spring. They show up in January at their favorite track, and all of a sudden they wake back up. So I think horses for courses early in the meet is a good angle to look at, and then those trainers who get off to a fast or slow start, something to consider as well. Let's go to our 5th and final handicapping topic of the night in Night School, and this is going to wrap up our 2018 Night School season. We're going to talk 2-year-olds to 3-year-olds. It's, you know, every horse turns 3 on January 1st. They all share a similar birth date, no matter what day they were actually foaled. So all the 2-year-olds that we're seeing racing at the end of the year here are our stars for tomorrow for the Triple Crown Trail. And let's start with Neumeier on this one. Bob, we all love the pursuit of trying to find the next Derby winner or a Triple Crown kind of star. What things are you looking for maybe a current 2-year-old when they come back at 3?
Well, I tend to look at, because I'm a numbers guy, I tend to look at ratings at 2 and 3. And, you know, you hope that you get progression. You hope that you get better numbers at 3 than you did at 2. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. That's why I kind of get a kick out of trainer speak when they say, well, my horse is moving forward. Really? Is he or isn't he? I don't know. Maybe. Could be. But I usually give them 2 cracks. If they don't break through at 3, what they did at 2, I'm not interested. So that's the progression I look for. That's improvement from 2 to 3, and now I'm interested if a horse can improve at 3-year-olds.
So it's about the numbers for you. Caton, is there anything to the physical size? You know, I hear this. I've been around a long time, and I've seen a lot of horses. But I got to honestly tell you, I can't look at a horse and say, wow, he's really put on weight since last year. That just, in my eye, it doesn't work. Maybe, you know, some people struggle to see lead changes and don't have the visual eye for certain things. I can't tell if a horse is physically bulking up and progressing and looking more dominant from 2 to 3. Is there anything the eyes can tell you there that you could pass along?
Well, you know, and it's sometimes it's not an actual, you know, weight or physical size that they've grown so much as that they've filled out. And definitely that they didn't go the other direction, that they, that what sometimes happens, you see a 2-year-old who's extremely precocious, who stands out when you're looking at them physically at 2. And then when you see them at 3, when you see them make their first early starts, they suddenly don't stand out as much because the rest of the class has caught up. But actual raw size, and you want to see that a horse seems like they're flourishing, or we say moving in the right direction physically. It's kind of cliche, but seeming more mature, that there's more muscle definition, that there's more of a flow to the way they look overall, versus sometimes you'll see 2-year-olds that, even if they're winning, that are a little discombobulated, that they lack focus. And I will say this, the one thing I love to see in it is a 2-year-old who is winning on raw talent, who isn't doing everything perfectly, and who may not be, the prettiest horse in the world. Maybe they're big, but they're tall and lanky, and they kind of don't have that smooth flow or chiseled look about them, and they're able to win anyway. To me, that's the best possible sign you can see, because the thought is, if they can just kind of fine-tune what's already there, if they are able to mentally improve, or if the lead changes have been like sloppy, but now they're able, as they become 3-year-olds, to suddenly start to do that and put it all together, then that's the type of horse that is almost unbeatable. So I'm just looking to see what changes are taking place, and that they're positive. And if at 2, did they seem like they were already there? Because, the idea that you can maintain that peak for a horse as far as mental and physical maturity is concerned, for whatever age group they are, is, to do it over a period of time from the fall of their 2-year-old season, or the winter, November, December, all the way to May, is very rare. We haven't seen it in years and years as far as that's concerned. So I'm almost skeptical of those horses that seem to have it all perfectly at 2.
Yeah, and when they get to 3, for me, the thing I want to see is how they handle the 2-turn races. The 1-turn races really don't mean a whole lot to me. How do you finish in a 2-turn race? Do you physically look like you're running through the wire and you're not staggering home? It's not about some big fancy gallop out, though I like to watch the gallop out, and sometimes it probably influences you more than it ought to. But I want to see a horse who looks like they took the assignment and they passed the test. Whether they finish first across the wire or 3rd or 4th, how were they running on at the end? Because these tests are going to get more difficult as they go along. First race of the year is probably a mile and 70 for a lot of horses, mile and a 16th at the max. They're going to have to hit the mile and an 8th prep at some point and pass that test, and then of course they go on to the classic distances. So for me, it's, how are these horses finishing the last 16th, 8th of a mile and beyond the wire in their first 3-year-old starts back is really important to me. I want to see a horse that's not floundering at the end. I mean, show me a good speed horse at 2 that comes out at 3 and is brilliant, but as soon as they get hooked, they start backing up. It's not going to get any easier, a promise is fulfilled. Once he starts backing up, right away he's probably not going to be a Triple Crown kind of horse, and you can almost already say, let's go back to the sprint ranks. And you turned out with a horse like that, promises fulfilled, who turned out to be a fabulous sprinter and one of the best 3-year-old sprinters in the game. But they kind of tell their hands, I think, pretty quickly into the season based on how they finish things up when they start getting tested here in the more difficult tests. That's definitely something that I'm looking for. And as far as a schedule goes, I think that is so important with these horses. I know it all got turned upside down last year with Justify, and everybody's going to say that a schedule doesn't matter, but we all believed and we all said for decades before last year, not the Apollo curse or anything like that, but the statement that find me a Derby winner who had trouble during the course of the year. It's it's usually the ones who have had no feather in their path, no straw turned upside down, as we say, that things went to plan. The trainer mapped out a schedule. They were able to stay basically on that schedule or darn close to it. You know, like when Bolt Doro starts to go off the tracks a little bit last year and can't make the race that he's looking for, that's bad progression. I mean, I want horses to hit the dates that their trainers say that they're going to hit, or else I kind of feel like the wheels are going to come off by the time all these tests get more and more difficult. So the schedule to me is very important. The last eighth of a mile of their races when they come back at 3, those are the kind of things that I'm looking at. Brian, what about you?
Well, I'm going to kind of try to tie a couple of these things together and probably go back to a drum that I try to hit a lot over the course of this season, because going into those 2-turn tests, Jeremy, that you're looking for, one of the things that I'm trying to find leading up to those first big tests is I'm trying to eat up as much information as I can about physically how horses have progressed from 2 to 3, as Caton sort of talked about. And here's the thing. That's my blind spot. Jeremy, you kind of said you had the same one too. I'm not great at it. So that, not everybody is or can be or needs to be an expert on everything. And I think that that's a trap that a lot of people at all levels of racing, people employed in the industry, fans, I think we all kind of fall into this trap of, wanting to be an expert at everything. I'm not great at horse physicality. That's a weak spot for me. So I lean on people like Caton. I lean on people like Gabby Gaudet, Maggie Wolfendale to tell me what they see in these horses and how they think these horses are coming into their 3-year-old season. So, that's one of those things, as I've said multiple times on this show, build the team of people that you trust so that when you are confronted with a spot in your handicapping that to you is either a weak spot or a blind spot, or a spot that you just for the life of you cannot quite put it all together on, lean on the people that you trust to do the same thing. I'd rather tell somebody I honestly don't know than give out bad information. I'd rather steer them towards somebody who is an expert in that kind of area. And so over the course of the next couple months, we're going to have these horses who have been off kind of, early November to mid-January. And I'm going to be looking for opinions from the people that I know can look at a horse and get a better read on that horse than I can from staring at that horse all day long.
Well, that's good advice and good honesty, and that's something we always try to preach in this night school program. We don't all claim to know it all, and if you run into somebody at the track who claims that they do, they're probably the last person that you want to take any advice from. We're going to have one more segment on Night School for 2018. We'll have our typical weekly interview with Steve Byk as Brian Spencer catches up with him. But before I dismiss the panel for the end of Season 8, I want to thank each and every one of you who has listened throughout the course of this year and throughout the course of the 8 seasons. And to our great panelists, our Dean Jerry Schottenkirk, who's not with us tonight, but has been with us throughout the season. He's in the live chat tonight, but not at the time of our taping. We want to thank the Dean for all of his hard work in night school over the years and doing a great job. And a little maybe salute to Bob Neumeier, Caton Bredar, maybe a New Year's resolution from the two of you as you say goodbye for the year. Bob?
Yeah, I would say that don't be discouraged would be my word. And it is gambling, let's say. And within gambling comes good streaks and bad streaks, no matter how good you are. It's easy to get discouraged. It's easy to be intimidated. It's easy to be all those things. I'm as guilty of that as anybody else if I lose, 20 in a row, which can happen often. But when you understand the economics of the game, and it's not how many you win, it's what's the return when you win. And if I'm wrong 8 out of 10 times and I'm right 2 out of 10 or 1 out of 10, and I can still make a profit in being right 1 out of 10, that's really what I try to do. And I would encourage anybody in the game to do the same. And that is, when the number's blinking, pass the race, go to the next one, unless you think the horse is an absolute cinch. And who is that? I mean, there's not many. So I would just say, by and large, don't be discouraged. That would be my watchword.
And Caton?
I think I resolved to take a stand more often. I especially with multi-race wagers, I tend to, but I mean, in general, I tend to second guess myself a bit and also try to cover more bases than makes sense financially, for sure. So, and more often than not, what I've found is that if I if I just pare it down and say, okay, I don't know, so I'm going to go with my top choice and do a really small ticket, that those have been the ones that I've actually hit with more often than not. So sometimes less is more, and I'm going to try to subscribe to that theory of taking a stand and trying to be more definitive in terms of my wagering.
And on a personal note, I'm going to resolve to try to make night school into its 9th season next year, a little bit more on demand, a little bit more tech savvy, and a little bit more accessible for everybody. We want Night School to continue on for many more years to come, and we're working hard at that during the course of the off season to make it all happen for you, the great racing fans out there, both present and future. We never take for granted our existing fans in racing, and we certainly want to try to make your experience in the game as good as it can be. And we're going to try to get you more information than ever in the future years of Night School by leaning back on all these great lessons, now numbering 260 of them all time. We've got the capper on Season 8 of Night School coming up after this break.
And we'll be right back with more Night School.
Hey, what's going on? Mikey here, and I'm going to tell you about an offer from my good friends at ExpressBet. Let's be honest, we know you love playing the races, but you can't always make it to the track. Sometimes life just gets in the way of a good bet. Well, what if I told you about a place where you never miss a bet and you start with house money? You'd say I'm crazy, right? Well, not at ExpressBet. Your first $100 are on them. That's right. Sign up with expressbet.com using promo code XBRadio, bet $100, and they'll deposit $100 back into your account the very next day. Hey, plus you could get an extra $25 if you use Express Fund Direct Deposit. You see what I mean? House money for betting the races. It's that easy. Check it out at expressbet.com to learn more. And don't forget to sign up with promo code XBRadio. You're gonna love it. And that's a Mikey guarantee. Must be 18 years or older and 21 years old in certain states to open an account with ExpressBet and reside in a state where such activity is legal. Void where prohibited. National Gambling Support Line 800-522-4700.
Pick, bet, and cheer on live racing from Woodbine and Mohawk Park. Thoroughbred and harness action. The wagers are just the beginning. Watch award-winning broadcasts covering both breeds, incredible battles contested over the most unique grass course in North America. Experience the full fields with over 130 thoroughbred and 160 live harness days. Get access to free handicapping material and join the ranks of Woodbine and Mohawk Park players from all over the globe. For more information, visit woodbine.com.
Strategize, analyze, select. Join Keeneland Select to bet on racing from around the world on your computer, tablet, or smartphone, anytime, anywhere. Featuring the best rewards in racing, free past performances, live video, race replays, and more. Plus, Keeneland Select invests a portion of its profits back into the sport. Join Keeneland Select today and earn a $150 sign-up bonus at KeenelandSelect.com. Dedicated to the sport and dedicated to the players.
Next on FAQ 60, headwinds and tailwinds. While you rarely hear discussion of wind in thoroughbred or harness handicapping, it's a blustery topic in the American quarter horse world. Simply put, headwinds or tailwinds can have a major impact on the clock and the outcome of a quarter horse race. Make adjustments to emphasize horses with strong finishing kicks when racing into a headwind, while giving superior gate breakers who may lack real stamina a bigger chance when pushed along by a tailwind. Also, utilize wind direction and speed when handicapping a horse's next race. You may want to move up or down a previous performance you see in the program based on your knowledge of that past race's wind conditions. Speed figures also help you adjust your perception of time when dealing with winds. This FAQ 60 is brought to you by AQHA Racing and Horse Player Now. For more, go to AQHARacing.com.
Welcome back to our Knights at the Round Table.
welcome back here, ready to close out the season on Night School with our customary monthly visit from Steve Byk. And Steve covered a lot of ground on tonight's show with the roundtable, but one of the things, especially considering this is the December finale, we won't be back until early spring next year, so this is going to live on the Night School page, and we're going to be getting into Derby prep season here before we come back for season 10. We talked on the show between the roundtable what we're looking for between that 2-year-old and 3-year-old season, and wanted to kind of pick your brain as far as what you're looking for progression-wise and what you're looking for timeline-wise to try to find horses who are going to be ready to fire and ready to move forward as they start their way on their 3-year-old campaign on the Derby Trail.
Well, nice. I guess the easiest answer is progress of any kind, really. Things to latch onto that indicate a horse is going to stretch out and is going to be able to make the transition, and that they haven't either peaked early as 2-year-olds or that they may be distance challenged. You just think about what we've seen here the last couple of weeks after Breeders' Cup, and like Maximus Mischief, that performance in the Remsen going 1 1/8. You had the performance at Los Al in the Futurity by Improbable. That actually a particularly strong example of what you're looking for late in 2-year-old seasons and then early as 3-year-olds. I mean, here's a horse that was making a 2-turn debut and making it on a unusual oval. Not the easiest place for a horse to make its 2-year-old debut. The turns are very tight at Los Al. It's that elongated paperclip design. And then once they corner, then there's that long stretch. And to see a horse like Improbable do what he did, and do it, with clear progress and with a very evident step forward, that's a very encouraging kind of an indication that you got a horse that, as a 3-year-old, is absolutely going to take the longer distances and should get better with maturity. You're also interested in pedigree. Here's a horse by City Zip out of an AP Indy mare. And so you've got stamina on the bottom from the dam side, which you really like to see. And the way he finished was eye-popping. I mean, the more you watch the replay, the better it looks, frankly. So that comes to mind immediately. And you're going to get a lot of those horses making those 2-turn moves. The Lecomte is coming up at the beginning of the year at Fairgrounds, races like that, and early on the Davis at Tampa. There'll be plenty of horses that'll be going 2 turns by early February, and you'll get an indication. And you'll also see horses that are going to turn out to be closing sprinters, and horses that are going to do better going 1-turn miles or 7 furlongs. So you're looking for strong finish and for horses that moved forward when they tried 2 turns the first time.
And that's kind of, I think that dovetails nicely with what we discussed on the roundtable tonight, just the progression and not a ton of, you don't want to leave room for hiccups or setbacks or anything like that as these horses find their way on the Derby Trail. And Steve, to close out the season here, maybe on a little bit less gambling-oriented note, what's your number one kind of favorite moment on the racetrack in 2018?
That's always a loaded question. I could go with the maiden win by Carlisle Bell, the horse that I bred, and very well may be the only win that I get as a breeder. But Carlisle Bell, who was out of Ausable-Cosm, the horse that the first win we had at Saratoga with our DT stable, and crafted a Macho Uno filly, and Carlisle Bell broke her maiden early in the year, shockingly or very strangely. And you can appreciate this because I'm going to think that you were there at Arlington when Kickin' and Screamin' won. Yes?
Yeah, I was out there with you guys a handful of times.
Well, when that was May 17th, 2008, and 10 years to the day of the first win we had as a stable, Carlisle Bell broke her maiden at Belmont, and it is very special. In fact, I was watching it in the press box at Pimlico because it was Preakness week, and of course, when we got our first win as a stable, it was Preakness Day that year. So I've got to really take it in house with that answer. A homebred win. I don't know if I'll be able to say that again ever. So I think that's the one that will stay with me the most from 2018.
And congratulations on that too. A nice kind of full circle. You mentioned the 10 years between the first win and then your first win as a breeder. So a really good way to kind of close out the show on a personal note there for Steve. And for me, I just wanted to kind of put a bow on things with, we take the game really seriously all the time, and rightfully so. It's a gambling game. There's a lot of money on the line. It's an important sport. But, this has been a good year for me to sit back and kind of remember to enjoy the show a little bit. We got to see stars like Justify, Enable on the track in the United States. We get to see future stars like Newspaper of Record, and for me, those were some of the big points in 2018. A good year all around. So this is going to tie it up here for Season 8 of Night School. A big thank you to everyone on the round table: Bob Neumeier, Caton Bredar, Jeremy Plonk, Jerry Schottenkirk, and as always with our monthly visits, Steve Byk. On behalf of the entire crew, Brian W. Spencer from HorsePlayerNow.com saying thank you so much for joining us for Season 8. We'll be back in March for Season 9. Good night.